This conference will now be recorded.
Hello, Dilip. Hi, Ravi, Vaibhav.
Hi Naveen, good morning.
Good
Good
morning.
morning. Yeah, I think we should wait. Uh, yeah, we'll start session in next 5 minutes, okay?
Sure.
As we started late last few sessions, right? They might be joining late.
This conference will now be recorded.
Okay. So till now we had discussions about Spring Core module, right? We discussed about IOC and dependency injection and life cycles. And yeah, as part of IOC, we discussed about containers and the various types of dependency injections and how do we manage lifecycle methods. And yesterday we discussed about depends on. There's a property name called depends on and dependency check, dependency check to make dependencies injection mandatory. We use these two concepts. We use this concept for particularly to make dependency injection mandatory when you have dependencies in your bean, the compulsory bean properties. Dependency check we achieved using at the rate required annotation also. At the rate required annotation also. Now, today we will going to see auto wiring. Auto wiring. Okay. Already we discussed the annotation approach. Once again, we'll show you. Okay, the programmatic way how we can do this auto wiring and again annotation approach also. Okay, as part of dependency injection, we learned that we can able to pass any dependencies which we want to our poser classes, right? All controllers and services, repositories in our MVC, right? In generally MVC we will have these three classes, right? In MVC layer we implement generally controllers and service and repositories we will have. All these classes, as I said, you need to implement them as a simple poser classes. Okay, so for them you need not to use any complex logic. You can make it a simple poser. You can create it as a simple poser, and for this poser class, if these poser classes need anything, right, all that inputs we can pass from XML file, correct? We can pass. If they need any properties, we can pass all the properties from our Spring XML file. So whatever we configure in the Spring XML file as a dependencies, all the dependencies can be injected here, injected from here. Who will take care of it at runtime? Your XML will be reading at runtime. Your XML will be reading by your IOC container. IOC container is a embedded Java class only. Okay, this IOC container will read. Your IOC container will read, and it will pass all the properties to your class. If you have dependency here, something A. If you have dependency B, dependency C here, all the dependency values we can configure in XML file, and that can be injected, that can be passed. Whatever the values it need, that values will be given to your poser class by calling this class setter methods or constructors. We know about it. So in case of auto wiring, what will happen? In case of auto wiring, what will happen is auto wiring is only for secondary dependencies. Auto wiring is only for object type dependencies. Only for object type dependencies. We know, right? Dependencies can be primitive type dependencies. Your poser might have some string variables, integer numbers, right? Your poser class can have various types. So in all the types, if your class is having some another class dependency, a object as a dependency, then auto wiring is useful. Auto wiring means what? Here, as we are saying from Spring XML file, injected from here, we are saying injected from here means what? As a developer, you are the developer and you are doing all the configurations here. You need to put all the configurations here as a developer. You need to put all the configurations here. Let's say controller needs a dependency, service needs a B dependency, repository needs a C dependency. All that A, B, C values you need to pass here. You manually need to pass here. Developer manually will pass the values here. In case of manual dependency injection, manually we pass A, B, C values. That values will be injected here. When auto wiring come into the picture, as a developer, you need not to do this manually. You need not to configure the dependencies. Your container automatically will understand your dependencies. Consider your controller need A dependency, service needs B dependency, repository needs C dependency. Your container will understand your dependencies and it will check for ABC is available in your container or not. ABC values, if it available in your container, automatically it will inject them. You manually need not to inject it, but this ABC types should be object types. Your ABC types should be object types. So if your class or if any poser, if it have any secondary type or object type as a dependency, you need not to inject them manually. If the classes beans are available, automatically those beans will be injected. A class bean with ID A, B class bean I configured with ID bean, C class with ID C. If I have these properties, if I have these classes in my XML, that would be enough. I no need to do dependency injection manually. Automatic dependency injection can be happen. So how we can achieve this automatic dependency injection? To achieve it, in XML we have auto-wire. There is an attribute name called auto-wire. Auto-wire equal to, we have few options here. Auto-wire by type, auto-wire by name, auto-wire constructor, auto-wire constructor, and auto-wire none. No auto-wire, right? So here we have these three types. Basically, we can use these three types. One is by type, by name, constructor. So out of these three, this is the most popular and recommended one. By type is the most popular and recommended one. I'll tell you the reason why it is. Okay. So by using auto wiring, what we are achieving it is, as a developer, manual dependency injection is not required. Earlier we used to do this dependency injection manually. So that manual dependency injection, we are avoiding it. What is the benefit if I avoid it? What is the benefit? If you see, consider your application is having, as we discussed before, here your application is having 100 plus controllers, 100 plus services, and 100 plus repositories we have here. So around 300 classes you have here. Into 300 classes you have 300 dependencies. So instead of doing that 300 dependencies manually, and while doing manual dependencies, sometimes we might do mistakes as a manual dependency injection. So instead of doing that 300 times manual dependency injection, if we assign that job to Spring itself, if we say you take care of the dependency injection, Spring will take care. You need not to do any dependency injection manually, so that 300 times manual effort is reduced. As a developer, you need not to worry. You need not to do manual dependency injection 300 times. 300 times manual dependency injections is avoided. So as a developer, we can relax here. During the dependency injection, you better relax, because IOC will take care. Your IOC will take care of the dependency injection. It will check whether A, B, C is available in your container or not. If it is available, fine. It will do the dependency injection. You need not to inject them manually. You need not to inject them manually. Instead, automatically it will inject. Let us see how this works. I'll create 3 classes. Okay. So here, this is how I'll create 3 classes. I'll create one car class. Car is having dependency of engine. Engine is the dependency for car class. And so that you need an engine class. Engine is having dependency of fuel class. Engine is having dependency of fuel. Fuel is dependency of fuel type. So consider this fuel type is primitive, string type. String fuel type. So here in the auto wiring concept, right? In this auto wiring concept, only the secondary types are eligible. Engine is eligible for auto wiring, and fuel also eligible for auto wiring, as auto wiring supported only for objects. So Spring can automatically inject fuel. This is eligible, and this is also eligible for auto wiring. and this is not eligible. This one we need to pass. This one we need to pass manually. And here, right, for doing dependency injection, I have engine dependency, fuel dependency, and fuel type dependency. Here you need to have setter method, set eng. A setter method required here, set eng. And here, set fuel. And here, set fuel type. So fuel have fuel type dependency, engine have fuel dependency, car have engine dependency. Okay, so when you have these dependencies, you need to have the respective setter methods to inject that values. To inject engine value, set engine method. To inject fuel, set fuel method. To inject fuel type, set fuel type method. Now how to do configuration in Spring XML file? For fuel, you need to create bean like this. Bean ID fuel, any ID you can give, and the class name, your fuel class. And to call setter methods, we know, right, what we need to call. As I want to pass this value using setter method, we need to and fuel class is having dependency of fuel type. You need to call that fuel type here using setter method, right? Property name means your setter method, fuel type, and the value we can pass here. That already we are aware of it. Why we need to do manual dependency injection here? I'm doing it manually, petrol or diesel, whatever it is, because this container cannot decide which fuel type you want to pass. It is a string type. As a developer, you need to pass. Manual intervention is required here. Manually, you need to set this property fuel type and you need to pass the value here. Okay. During auto wiring also, you need to do this. Manually only you need to do this because Spring cannot do auto wiring because it is a primitive type. Fuel name, as it is a name, it cannot able to decide which name you want. Now coming to engine is also having a dependency fuel type, right? Engine ID, class name engine, and for engine you need not to do. Generally in manual dependency injection we do this, right? In manual dependency injection we do this fuel, and fuel ID we will pass here as a reference. Yeah, this is the manual dependency injection. This is the way of manual dependency injection. So whatever fuel object created manually as a developer, what you are doing is here, this fuel object, whatever fuel object you created here, that object reference, same reference you are passing here. Okay, so that this fuel object will be injected into engine. Now this is not required in auto wiring, as I said, right? You can avoid this tag. So this is not required. Developer need not to do this. Instead of that, what you can do is here in this engine tag, there is an attribute name called auto wire. Here you configure auto wire equal to, you can configure by type. You can configure auto wire by type. When you configure this auto wire by type, when you configure this, right, auto wire to by type, when you do this configuration, this is not at all required. This complete line is not at all required. You can remove this tag from here. This tag is not at all required. You need not to do that. Automatically that will be happened. When you do this, what will happen? When you do this, Spring container will check. As you configured auto wire by type, Spring container will go to engine class and it will check what number of setter methods you have. You can have any number of setter methods, any number of dependencies one class can have. So you can have any number of setter methods here. It will check how many setter methods you have. I have one setter method here, set field. So the set field dependency is what? Field type only. Set field dependency is field class type. The type is field class type. Then your container will check for the field class type. Is there any class that configured with this class name field? So in Spring XML file, it will find there is a class name field. Spelling mistake, right? Correct it. So class name field. So it will find the class name field here. If it find the class name field, automatically that object will be injected. Automatically this object will be injected. So when container search for the field, it will find the field object. Directly this object will be injected here. Directly this object will be injected here. The same way for car also. Bean ID car, class name car class. And here also dependency injection manually you need not to do. If it is manually, you need to do like this. Engine reference you need to pass here. Engine and engine class reference is what? For secondary type we use references, right? If it is a primitive type we use value. As it is secondary type you need to use a reference, and the engine reference you need to pass here. So if you use auto wire here, if you use auto wire equal to by type if you use here, you need not to do this manual dependency injection. You can avoid this statement here. This is not at all required when you use auto wire. Okay, you understand, right? As a developer, you need not to do dependency injections manually. When you configure auto wire by type, what it will do while creation of your object, it will check all your setter methods and it will find what are all the dependencies for you, and it will check it in your XML file whether this class type is available or not. Whether this class type is available or not. If it find that class type, automatically it will inject here. Automatically it will inject here. So this is a great feature. If we see from the development point of view, as a developer, you need not to bother about dependency injection. Container will take care. But what you need to make sure is your object must be created. So using bean tag, you must declare your bean classes. And dependency injections will be taken care by Spring. That too only secondary types. Okay. Remember that only secondary types only can be auto-wide. As I have field type here, and if you put for this one also field type auto-wide, Spring cannot imagine what is the field type and what I should inject. Right? String values will not identify directly. So when you have a primitive type dependencies, the primitive values you must pass. You must pass that values. But when you have secondary dependencies, use auto wire. When you configure auto wire, container can help you. Container can help you by searching your setter method, your required matching object it will find from the XML file and it will inject it. The find matching, it will find the matching required type. If that type it found, it will inject here. So that is the use of by type. By type means what? Whenever you configure by type, Spring will understand this setter method needs this type. It will search for that particular type in your XML file. So whenever it find that particular type, it will inject it. Now there is a problem. You can ask me here. There is a problem. If I have two beans, if I configure two beans in my Spring XML file, two field beans, one field bean, consider you have two field beans, same IDs we cannot maintain. As we cannot maintain same IDs, consider you have different ID here. Consider you have different ID here. ID is equal to F1. Okay, different bean ID, and the field type is here. Field type is here. Instead of petrol, consider CNG. I have CNG type I have here. Now when I configure by type here, I'm asking container, you do the dependency injection using type searching. When I configure by type here, type searching it will do. It will go to engine class and it will tries to search for the fuel type. It will try to search for the fuel type and it will found two fuel types. One is with petrol and one is with CNG. F and F1, two it will find, one F and one is F1. When it finds these two objects, right, it will confuse which one to inject. As it is auto-wire by type, it will confuse. It will try to search for the fuel type. It will found two matchings. It will found two matchings. One is F and one is F1. It will confuse and it will throw exception. It will throw exception by saying auto-wiring failed due to ambiguity. Expecting one matching only, but I found two. Container will say, I'm expecting one matching only in XML file, but you configured two. I'm confusing here. Which one I need to inject? Basically, right, in general we will not configure same type multiple times. In general, we will not configure. As a developer, we will not do this, but in few scenarios, right, we might do this. In few scenarios we might do this. For a few scenarios we might do this. So your application might have same class configuration two times. Consider one single application connecting with multiple databases. Okay, you have two data source classes. Consider this is one Oracle data source, I mean same data source only. So this is one data source class and this is also data source class, but here it is connecting with MySQL, and consider here it is connecting with Oracle. So you need one Oracle connection and one MySQL connection for your application. You want to deal with two databases. In that scenario, you might have same data source class name. In very few scenarios we configure, right, same class name. Okay, so if you have the same class name two times, right, it will confuse when you use auto-wire. How you resolve it? Either by doing manual dependency injection, as it is confusing, right, as container is confusing, you need to do manual dependency injection here. You need to use property and you need to pass the value. The one is manual dependency injection is recommended. Otherwise, you know, in auto wiring, if you want to participate only this one, if you want to make participate in auto wiring, and if you want to avoid this from auto wiring, because when you try to search, right, container will go and search for the type. For engine class, it will try to search for the fuel matching. So when it find two fuel matchings, one fuel matching here and one fuel matching here, when it find two fuel matchings, when it find fuel matching 1 and fuel matching 2, if it say I'm not participating in auto wiring, if you are looking for, if you are searching for auto wiring, I'm not the eligible candidate for that one. If you want to consider for auto wiring, I am not the eligible candidate. One bean can say I'm not participating in the auto wiring. So that is also one way. Okay, if you don't want here, if you don't want this, if you don't want do manually dependency injection while doing confusion, right, what you can do here, auto wire candidate false, you can mention I'm not going to participating in auto wire. The CNG can mention, for the CNG you can mention auto wire hyphen candidate equal to false. By default auto wire candidate is true. If you don't configure anything, that is by default true. If you configure it to false, what will happen? When you configure auto wire by type, container will try to search for the fuel type. It will find two fuels, fuel 1 and fuel 2. It will find both, but one fuel bean is saying I'm not participating in auto wiring. Okay, don't confuse. If you find one more also, don't confuse, inject the other one, because I'm not participating. This fuel will say CNG I'm not participating, so that what will happen, this fuel only will participate in auto wiring and petrol only will be injected. If you don't configure AutoWare candidate false, what will happen? This bean also will be contest in the dependency injection so that the confusion will be erased. So when there is a confusion, either by avoiding AutoWare candidate equals, by configuring AutoWare candidate equal to false, whichever you don't want participate, or else you do manual dependency injection, give F or F1 here, then there is no confusion. Okay, so to resolve confusion, either you need to use AutoWare candidate false, or else you do manual dependency injection. Okay, this will happen while using byte type. Byte type recommended only. Okay, byte type is the recommended. What is by name? We have by name also here. What is by name? By name also we can configure here. By type is for setter method. Okay, by type by name are for setter method. We use this by type by name for setter methods only, not for constructor dependency injection. We have two types, right? One thing, injection can be happened through setter method, and dependency can be happened through constructors also. Okay, so for constructor we use constructor. We talk about that later. Okay, by name also you can use here. When you use by name, the problem with by name is here your reference name is fuel. Forget about the type now. Here we have reference names, fuel. This is the reference name. So this is the name. The type is fuel type, the name is fuel, or consider something FL you configured here, or else whatever name you are configured here. There is a name you configured as a reference, right? We have a fuel name here. Name is fuel. So when you configure AutoWare for your engine here, when you configure AutoWare for this engine here, engine AutoWare by name. If I choose by name here, what will happen? When container try to create object for engine class, it will create engine class object and it will read the dependency name. It will read your dependency name. Fuel is your dependency name. Fuel is your dependency name. Using this name, it will try to search for the bean. Using this name, it will search for the bean. This name, one of this bean, petrol or CNG, right? The same name should use as a ID here. As a ID, at least one bean should have this name. ID should match here. ID should match with your dependency name. Either this one or that one. CNG or petrol should have the matching name, fuel. So when you use by name, if one ID is having fuel, right, with same name, your dependency reference name and your bean name, both if match, then that object only it will inject here. When you use by name, what will happen? Whatever name you are using here, the same name you should use your for ID. Of course, this type should match. In type, there is no compromise. If I configure name for unmatching class, instead of fuel here I have something XYZ class. If I configure XYZ class with fuel, anyway that is not going to match to your fuel class. That is not accepted. Okay, it will search for the fuel class only. There are two fuel classes, but it will search for the ID also, which is matching with this reference name. Okay, so that matching name only it will inject here when you configure by name. Now you can see here by name, it looks like it is avoiding the confusion, right? Because ID name it is choosing to the dependency injection. This type and name both are checking, so that dependency one more bean, no scope to one more bean using the same ID, right? For this bean ID also, if I use the same fuel name, it will not allow, right? In XML file we cannot use same bean ID multiple times. It will throw error. Same ID should not use. So somewhat the confusion is reducing here. If I use by name, somewhat confusion is reducing. But the problem is, right, the problem when you go with the by name, always you need to remember the names whatever you have in the dependencies. So consider if your classes are having 1000+ names here, the same naming conventions I need to maintain for the IDs also. That is very difficult. Okay, whatever dependency names you have here, in your classes, the same names you need to maintain for your IDs. That's very difficult part. That is very difficult part. So by name is not recommended. That's what, right? So always you need to create a bean with this ID by using this name as a ID and your type as a class. So that is not at all recommended. Okay, because as a developer you need to remember all the IDs, same IDs you need to maintain here. When naming convention is matter, already I implemented, considered there are 1000 plus classes. You want to put a new ID. Today you are implementing a new class. You don't remember what are all the IDs you maintained across all your 1000 classes. You need to go there and you need to edit each class and you need to check the name, whatever you used there. Is that the feasible way to the developer to find out the names and configuring unique names? No. So that's why by name is not at all recommended. Go with by type. When you use by type, that particular type matching it will inject. It don't care about your IDs. But there is a chance of having confusion. That confusion you can avoid by using AutoWare candidate. Okay. But in very rare situations, we will have two beans with same type. In very rare cases, we will have two beans with same type, so that you really need not to worry about it. So comfortably you can use by type. And when we use constructor, instead of having setter method, if you have constructor here, a parameterized constructor. If you have a parameterized constructor here, or if you have a parameterized constructor here, using constructor if you want to do the dependency injection, right? You need to configure constructor here. You need to configure constructor here. When you configure constructor, AutoWare constructor, what it will do? It will search for the constructor and the constructor arguments. Only one argument if I have here with field type, one constructor I have with one argument, field type. Here I have field type. So it will search for that field type, and that field type it will inject automatically. Constructor also will follow internally by type mechanism only. It will search for the types, not for the names. Constructor and by type both searching strategy is the same. By type will search for the type only. Constructor also will search for the type only. Searching strategy for both of them is same. But by type and by name we use for setter dependency injection, whereas constructor we use for constructor dependency injection. So that is the only difference. That is the only difference. Okay. So this is what auto wearing is. Any doubts so far? Are we clear?
By name, I have some confusion. Can you repeat once?
Which one? By name?
Yes, by name.
Yeah. So when it is by name, right? Here for every object we are creating a reference name also, right? In our class we create reference name. Consider
Yes.
here I have L and my reference name is FUEL, FUEL. Or consider you have reference name here FL. So when I have FL here as a reference name, and when I use by name here, I want to do dependency injection through setter method. So I'm using by name here. When you configure by name, container will search for a fuel object, container will search for a fuel object, container will search for a fuel object, which is having FL as a name, which is having FL as a ID here. Is there any bean which is having FL? No. Right? So there is no bean matching with FL, so that it will not perform any dependency injection. So for that reason, what you need to do, you need to configure for one bean, the ID is FL. So if you configure FL ID here, this name should match. Your bean reference name here and the ID name also should match. If both match, then that object only it will inject. Okay, your bean reference name and your bean ID name should match. So here the dependency name is FL and the dependency object ID also FL. So this one automatically will be injected here. This object will be injected into engine class. Name should match along with type. Name also should match. That is the criteria in by name. In by type, only this type should match. Only this one should match. Whereas in by name, this one should match with the type and ID should match with the reference name. Are you clear?
Yes, yes, Naveen. Clear now.
Okay. So that is the reason I'm saying this is not recommended. Do we need to remember all the IDs which we used across the application? No, right? So it's
No,
it's
it
a
would be
tedious job. If you are going to remember them, that's fine. But it's always not possible that what all IDs we used across the application. That's a tough job when you add a new requirement into your application, right? So again, if you have a field dependency or some other dependency, you need to maintain unique names also there, unique reference names also. Generally, while coding, what we do, we create a class name and space, whatever default name we get there, and we use it as a reference, right? So that flexibility we lose. That's why by name is not recommended. Okay, don't use by name. Go with by type only. Auto wiring using XML. Okay, create a project and add dependencies. Let's have your classes here. Car engine field. So I have a car class here and consider car is having private engine class dependency. Generally, see while creating these references, right? How we are creating. When we click Control Space, we will get the default names. Generally, as a developer, we use the default names, whatever we get here, right? So the default name engine, and we provide a setter method here. Using the set engine, automatically will be injection happen. Dependency injections happen here. Set engine method will be called. And same way for engine. Engine is having field dependency, and using the set field method, we are going to inject it. Again, it's a secondary type. If it is a secondary type, we know that we can inject using auto wiring. Auto wiring can be possible on secondary types only, not on primitive types. So set field in engine. And coming to field, I have a field name here. I have a field name here. Field name is a primitive one, right? It is a primitive one, so that you cannot do auto wiring. You cannot do auto wiring. You need to pass this value manually. You need to pass the value manually here. Set field name. Set field name will be called manually. Okay. So if you see here, field class is having primitive type. This one manually we should pass. Developer should do at any cost manual dependency injection. When it comes to engine class, it is having secondary type. So auto wiring can be possible on this. And when it comes to car class, we have engine. Auto wiring is possible. It's a secondary type. And to inject them, we have setter methods. To inject the values, we have setter methods. To inject engine, set engine method. To inject fuel, set fuel method. And to inject fuel name, set fuel name method we have. Then start using auto wiring here. Create XML. See, yeah, okay. Create fuel class. Fuel class is having fuel name as a dependency, and we are passing that fuel name manually here. That we cannot avoid. We need to do manual dependency injection only as it is primitive. Now coming to engine class. Engine class ID, class name is engine. Engine class is having dependency fuel. Generally, if it is a manual dependency injection, we pass the fuel reference here. Yep. Then only setter will be called. Same thing with car also. In car, we have this engine dependency, right? Engine object we need to pass here. So this one getting given input here, and this one given input here. This is how manually dependency injection is doing. So when you load this XML into your app, when you load this into your container, right? When you load this into container, it will create objects, then it will perform dependency injections. So all the setter methods will be called as we are doing manual dependency injection everywhere. Set fuel passed, set fuel name into fuel class, set fuel into engine class, set engine into car class. Right? 3 setter methods executed because we are doing manual dependency injection. Let I comment it here. In engine class setter method and in car class setter method, both I am not calling. Means I'm not injecting it. So only fuel name injected. The remaining 2 values not injected. So if you don't inject, those values will not be available. So here, if you don't want to do it manually, one thing you can do, put auto wiring here. Auto wire by type. Put here auto wire by type. So when you put auto wire right, it's by type, automatically this fuel object will be injected here. And automatically this engine object will be injected here. Now run it. You must see 3 setter methods should be calling. See, set fuel, set engine, both calling. Automatically calling. You didn't call it. We didn't mention anything here. We commented it, but still it is calling because of auto wiring. In by type, as I said, there is a problem when you have 2 beings, right? I have 2 fuels. One is fuel 1, say fuel underscore 1 and fuel underscore 2. There are 2 beings. One is petrol and one is CNG. 2 fuel objects here. And when I run, I'll see dependency, unsatisfied dependency error. The reason, read here. Container saying, expecting single matching bean, but found 2. Fuel 1 and fuel 2. It is saying, I found 2. I'm expecting only 1 single matching, but I found 2. So that I'm confusing. Fuel 1 and fuel 2 both I found, so I'm confusing. So then in this case, one thing should compromise in auto wiring. This bean itself, it should say, or this bean itself, it should say that I'm not participating in the auto wiring. So by using auto-wire candidate to false, by default it is true. If you configure it false, then it will not participate in auto-wiring. While now container is searching for it, as it will not participate in auto-wiring, container will not confuse. It will do its work. So two fuel objects created, only one fuel injected and one engine injected into car. Fuel injected into engine and engine injected into car. So without confusion, the object injected. Which object injected? Petrol object only injected. This one not participating. Only this one participated. Okay. So this is how you can resolve confusion in case of by type. Same thing you can achieve using by name also. You can put by name also here. But if you put it in by name, right, one bean should match with this name. Let's run it. Set engine in car happened. What about this? I put by name and nothing is called here. Set fuel is not at all called. When I use by name, even it is not throwing error also. So it is considering it as not mandatory. When we use by type, somehow we got the exception. So nothing is matching and it is not at all injecting anything. So your setter method is not at all called because the name matching bean is not found. Your engine class is having a fuel dependency with the name FUEL fuel, but there is no bean ID matching with that fuel here. So if a bean, if match with this fuel, the name with this name, then that one will be injected. Run it now and see. Now set fuel is executing because one bean is matching with the name. So this bean is injecting. If we use by name, that is the problem. Okay, that's why I said use by type. By type is the recommended one. When it is a by type, only one object will be injected, whichever is matching. But when it finds two matching objects, it will confuse. To resolve that confusion, one object should not participate in auto wiring. Using auto wire candidate false, we can stop that. Using auto wire candidate false, we can stop by participating in auto wiring. This will not participate in auto wiring from here onwards. And we can use constructor also. In case if you have a parameterized constructor here, right, generate constructor using fields, which means parameterized constructor. Now I have constructor here. I want to do constructor based dependency injection. Okay, so this is set field method and this is engine constructor. Now for engine class you need to use, instead of by name or by type, you use constructor. So if it is by type or by name, it need to call setter method. When it is constructor, it will call the constructor. So engine class constructor is calling now. In engine class, in engine class we have parameterized constructor. It is calling that constructor only to inject your value. When it will call the constructor, when you use auto-wire type to constructor. These three are the available options. One is by type, and the one is by name, and the one is constructor. Okay, we have these three available. And the other one is none, which means it will not do anything. Okay, and there is a property called auto detect also. If you are not aware that you have constructor or setter, in that case auto detect you can use. If you are not aware which one you have internally, then it will decide. If it is a parameterized constructor, constructor dependency injection, right? If it is a setter, it will use setter dependency injection. Auto detect also you can use. Auto detect can be useful for setter method and it can be useful for constructor also. Both can be handled. See, for constructor also we use the same, for setter also we use the same. What we used auto detect. Yeah, I think that's all. Are we clear?
Yes, Naveen.
Yeah. So the same thing we achieved using annotation. You know, again the same topic we will discuss. Okay, in the next session, stereotypes. So here finally the conclusion is what here? The conclusion is developer need not to worry about the dependency injections. As a developer need not to doing manual dependency injection. Manual dependency injection is avoided. As a developer, you need not to do any manual DIs. Everything will be injected automatically, right? Everything will be injected automatically. You need not to put this property tags, right? Everything happened automatically using auto wiring. Okay, and all the available options for setter method is by type, by name, and auto detect. For constructor we have constructor and auto detect. One more option is auto detect. Okay, and I'll recommend by type. Always I recommend by type. In general we use by type only. Okay, we use by type only most of the times, always. Okay, yeah, that's all. I think no confusion, right? I'll send the example, just have a run. Tomorrow we'll see annotation approach and stereotypes also. One more time we'll discuss, and I'll conclude the basic core concepts tomorrow. I'll conclude and I'll go with some advanced concepts. Tomorrow I'll conclude it, which means once again I'll show you whatever we discussed, right? We will conclude it, then we will start advanced concepts. Okay.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
I think